opportunities ahead, what could be possible risks as well. And yeah, and what I would expect at the end of this 1 hour is a great conversation, as it has been in so far, I think, but also really with some few concrete ideas. Just few ideas, of course, we can't elaborate too much in 1 hour, but if we put the right seeds, we can certainly have the time offline using the Futurium to elaborate these seeds and maybe collectively develop some interesting hints to be offered for future possible policies. So it is up to us, all the participants, to take this hour and do the reflection and really identify these seeds. And then we will see what to do next. So I stop here, this few minutes introduction, thanking Simon again, and now the floor is to Simon for his inspiring words. Thank you very much.
Just let me catch up before Simon to remind you of how this works, just a few technicalities for all of you. So first we have a speech by Simon, about 20 minutes, presenting his vision of the future of collaborative workspaces and collaboration. We will then move, and while Simon speaks, I invite you all to use extensively the chat to comment on his speech, to underline the risks and opportunities that emerge. So the goal is really to set ourselves in the vision of the future. Okay, Simon, can you hear me now? Because I see some comments. Simon? Hello?
Yeah, I think I might be having some technical difficulties. I might be having some technical difficulties. I don't know if you're hearing me okay now.
Yeah, we do. Can you try to speak?
All right, because David, I can hear you, but I didn't hear what was being said before. I'm sorry to have missed that.
Okay. Well, Franco was introducing...
Jump into it?
Yes, Franco was introducing the purpose of this meeting. Let me just conclude by saying, please use the chat extensively to post questions, to write your comments about what Simon is saying. After that, we will have a second part, which is more into the policy context and policy implications. So anyone will be able to make interventions and to present their point of view on what does it mean for policy. And I cut with this, Simon, just if you can introduce yourself before the speech.
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you everybody for attending. It's very exciting to be in conversation with all of you. I am particularly looking forward to the second half of this event, to sort of like get the conversation flowing, as I'm very excited to hear what everybody else has to offer to this conversation. A little bit about myself. So I'm part of the global management team of the Hub, which is a global network of spaces which work in a collaborative manner to create impact across the world. I'm based in the Hub in Amsterdam, where I'm sitting right now, and I hope you can excuse the echo. We've had a little bit of technical difficulty setting up here. My background is varied, so I've in part been an entrepreneur, tried and failed, and succeeded at times, and also worked in financial research for a Wall Street firm, and sort of been all over the place, really. But the last 4 years I've spent working within hubs, and the last 2 years within the hub globally. My particular field of interest is one of trying to see how we design systems that can scale for impact. That's really what my job description has increasingly become in the last couple of years. So I'll also try and speak a little bit from that perspective, and not too concretely on sort of like the exact detailed examples of how to create spaces for collaboration, or work, but more try and see what does that mean systemically. I think that from a policy side, that's probably also more interesting. But maybe jumping into what David asked me to talk a little bit about today, I've sort of like taken it away and tried to interpret the guidance that I got and tried to understand, you know, how I could best contribute to the conversation. And I think there's different points. I'd like to talk a little bit about the need and the situation right now that we're facing as a global society. I'd like to talk a little bit about some trends that I think we can all observe and what they mean, and maybe how they sort of lean into what the future will be. And my example will be in large part from the hub, obviously, as that's where I'm coming from. But I hope that you don't see it as a sales speech or a pitch, but really just as that's where obviously my practice lies, and it applies to many other organizations that are in this field globally. But maybe to kick us off, what I think is very interesting is that I see two basic drivers for success of the human species, to put it that bluntly. One is belonging and one is collaboration. I think that belonging is what drives us together in groups, and you know, feeling that we're part of something, that we can co-own something. A collaboration allows us, when we feel we belong to something, to actually reach a higher goal, a better outcome, a better result. And this is from the coming together of the first sort of prehistoric tribes. When you search for safety, you came together in groups and so on. The collaboration then actually allowed them to succeed, to build villages, to travel across great distances, and to actually survive, which is essential. Now, at the risk of sounding trite, we need this these basic human skills of belonging and collaboration more than ever. Just a few days ago, the UN released a scathing report that the world carbon dioxide concentrations has passed the 400 parts per million mark. This leaves Bill McKibben and the 350.org looking for a new brand name. But while this kind of news would have scared us many years ago, or just a few years ago, it's now less than headline news, with much of the world totally focused on this self-created and self-perpetuating financial crisis that leaves, you know, every political leader in the Western world without the ability and wish for any significant vision for the future. So you come to the realization that it's not a political problem, it's our problem. It's a collective challenge for survival. That's good news. I'll give you another example. Luckily, you know, in recent, there's some other recent trends around this whole sort of carbon thing. You know, these UN reports can be quite dreary, but there was one recent report by carbontracker.com, which is definitely recommendable to check out, which says that all the publicly listed oil companies which are valued on the oil reserves that they potentially can pull out of the ground are overvalued, because 60 to 80% of the underground resources and reserves cannot be burned if we're to make this sort of like 2-degree temperature increase mark that's a shared goal. This is super interesting because it creates a need. What does that mean? What it means is that these companies, they're being forced to innovate. They've got a knife at their throat saying that ultimately their market capitalization, their access to capital, their access to evolution is going to be very, very limited if they continue to pursue a carbon emitting strategy. That's exciting. On the even lighter side, then you could look at, there are basically some ideas out there which are not that novel in essence, but technological evolution has brought some key approaches which all stem in collaboration to the surface, and that all have this power to unleash what I would call the true potential of the human race. I'm going to mention a couple of them which I think are really interesting, and you're very familiar with them, but I think they're just they have a couple of basics which are exciting. One is crowdfunding. The key component here is ownership. You know your crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. You know that people, they're raising funds for all kinds of different projects, from films to NGOs to whatever, and they try and sort of like snare you in with or snare you in with T-shirts and snazzy merchandise. But that's not actually what works. What works is that people feel ownership towards a cause that will make an impact on the potential investor's life, or of the issue on people or issues that they care about. And that's fundamentally what an investable idea is, and not necessarily the business plan about it. And so there's, I just want to leave that picture there. That's the crowdfunding. Then there's crowdsourcing, which is very interesting. It's also a trend that's growing very rapidly at the moment, of content, of ideas. If you think about it, just a few decades back, this type of approach was, virtually impossible. You could crowdsource a design, but it meant, mailing in your suggestion and getting an answer 3 months later. And now you can do it in a few hours or a few days. It's even becoming a norm in certain industries, even quite old school sectors and industries are seeing sort of the economic and creative sense that it makes to crowdsource. There are also innovative platforms like OpenIDO.org, which seek to engage contributors around the world who are actually excited about solving key issues competitively and collaboratively. And even governments and large corporations are starting to really, put their challenges out there and say, okay, so what are all these different perspectives? And the final one I wanted to mention, which is another crowd one, and that's sort of the crowd knowledge, the crowd intelligence, the collective intelligence component. In its very sort of like day-to-day form that we actually know and use platform-wise, Wikipedia is a fantastic example of something that almost becomes an authoritative resource on it. But much closer to home, we every day use social networks to crowdsource information, be it from professional or personal peers that we trust and admire. There's this unbelievable wealth of information in the crowd, and there's very little authority which actually says what's right or what's wrong in most cases. The responsibility lies with you as a knowledge consumer, as an information consumer, to decide who you trust and what makes sense for your particular context. Now, why am I talking about all of this? I'm talking about it because we have a need for collaboration, and this crowd tendency is exciting as a response to how we can collaborate. Effectively, crowd engagement is a democratization of the economy. We've only seen the beginning because we're still living sort of like under this effect of the peak of the old world economy, if you will. To the next decade or two, the digital native generation that's growing up, they're sort of like, heading out of high school now into universities and will be flooding the streets to create enterprises and projects in the future. They grow up thinking in collaborative ways. They grow up thinking, how do I use the crowd? It's not sort of like a strategy they might consider, it's how they work, and that's exciting. So the main takeaway for me that I just wanted to point out using these examples, and there are plenty more out there, is the collaboration part. And that you can do it, you can actually collaborate on such a large scale. And many of these things are done, these types of collaborations are done on platforms, on technical platforms, which are out there. But many of these collaborations also take part in physical spaces around the world. And what I'll be spending some time on talking about is going to be sort of like how you marry the two and what are the perspectives there. I think one key thing about collaboration is that all these different crowd approaches are dependent on people put a common goal or an intent for impact at the center, and then you invite participation in and work towards a greater outcome that people are personally passionate about. And the beauty of that is that when you combine those key forces, you have a very potent and very agile system for innovation and production and learning. And that becomes super exciting. It's a less of the old 20th century idea that now we're just all working on one idea, you're in the engineering department and you're stuck there. It's more of the multidisciplinary. You're working on multiple issues, on multiple projects, multiple businesses at the same time, cross-pollinating, bringing ideas left and right. You can focus and drive, obviously, what you need to drive as an individual, while others, they pull you in for the small bits and pieces that you might be an expert on. But let's look at a little bit how we're actually collaborating to create solutions that have an impact. Because the default often is that we just need to kind of work on it, and there's different ways of going about that. You can have a project team, you can have a corporate department working on something, you can create a community, and so on. In the 20th century, it was much about you could either sit in an office, you could drive a truck, or you could work on a factory floor. Those were sort of like different typical careers. What's really interesting is that that's really changing now. In the last few sort of like 8 to 10 years, the co-working movement has risen up and has really manifested itself across the planet in many ways. So largely within tech and media communities, but attracting freelance professionals and micro multinationals, as they're called. However, that itself, the principle of co-working doesn't necessarily have any meaning apart from perhaps saving resources, because you're sharing resources and approach and creating a social setting. It doesn't necessarily have any impact, and there's no substantial proof yet that I've seen to say it does. But what's interesting is when we take this approach of sharing resources of multiple disciplines in the same room, as opposed to sort of like singular silos and departments, and then add mission and intent, because what happens there is you create a community that leans into a common purpose and pushes together and learns together. And I'm not trying to sort of, you know, I'm not advocating for Marxist reform and power to the employed people program, but I'm here talking about the masses of entrepreneurs and creators out there who are creating solutions that are maybe local, maybe scalable, but address fundamental needs in the marketplace and a need for the world. So this was all just trying to sort of like put some perspective out there of sort of where we are. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the magic sauce that we have in the hub, or we think we have at least. But that's not sort of like copyrighted to us. There are many others doing similar stuff, which is exciting. And then maybe look a bit more at the future. So what we've done is we've played around with some of these ingredients, collaboration, creativity, etc. Over the years, over the sort of 7 or 8 years of existence, we've come to find a model which in its current iteration, because it's always in flux, sounds a bit like this. One very important thing for us is to have space, physical space, and really be anchored. And that's actually something that's quite unique in this day and age, where everything, particularly in the last decade, has tended to move online. We're all talking about the digital economy, digital this, digital that. But it's very, very hard to replace a face-to-face conversation, physical proximity. You know, people, they'll happily travel from one side of the world to another to meet at a conference. And it's not so much about the content there necessarily. They probably all knew it from before when they were at home, but the actual physical meeting, it makes an astounding difference and creates bonds between human beings that allows them to collaborate when they're apart again. So that's something that we really try and shape and create those spaces. Then there's the inspiration and the intent. We really try to create spaces that are inspiring, not just in the sense that they're you know, Jill designed well, etc., but really that that they're full of inspiring people as well. Make sure that there's an attractive crowd that are all working on exciting topics and all driving their agenda for impact. But it's also about making sure that all of those people in there are intentful, that they're actually there to do something together, not necessarily work on everything together, but they're there for similar reasons. Another component that we have is a learning environment, which is hugely important, because if you create a space and a community where people can't grow, then it becomes dead. People become stale, and they're just doing the same thing again and again. So we run courses like Hub School, which in Hub Sao Paulo, for example, has over 4,000 people attending annually. And just learning stuff that inspires them, that grows them, and sort of like increases the experience for them of growing towards the impact they want to have. Or in Hub Madrid, where we're just working on launching a bachelor in social enterprise together with IE Business School. So these are some of the sort of like the learning escapes, if you will, that we're trying to sort of facilitate, be they official or not. So there's a lot of informal learning, and there's a lot of sort of, well, okay, if you want a degree, you can have one. Then on the content side, which is another key component, is we take a very strong programmatic approach to the evolution of enterprise, the evolution of incubators, or through incubators, through accelerators, which are embedded into hubs around the world, because we understand that if people want to work in the hub, and our members are largely entrepreneurs, then they're there to actually grow their business, to grow their mission, to be able to get to some kind of impact that they're excited about, and we need to generate space for that, and create processes and design for them to well, it's basically to have that growth, to see that growth. And finally, purpose is super key. So if you embed all of the above, sort of the space, the inspiration, the intent, the content and program, in a community with a shared intent of building a world for future generations, well, that's very powerful. So those are sort of the magic things that we try to do. And what you get from that is not just what the hub is, but it's what hundreds, if not thousands, of spaces and communities around the world are doing. We're just part of this, and it's truly a global movement. So in the past years, we've had well over 3,000 requests to create a new hub in over 600 cities globally. And while this number is exciting and humbling, what's much more interesting is that it's a super interesting marker for the need globally for a completely new sector that's emerging. It's a sector that wants to see a collaborative impact in the world, and a collaborative approach to how we work together to solve the world's challenges. So that's exciting. So I want to talk a little bit about what these building blocks will be in the future, and how we see it. So there are a couple of things that we need to that we can see emerging already, but will be, I think, absolutely essential in any future working and collaboration system. Open knowledge and data. We already talked a little bit about the crowd knowledge, the Wikipedia part, but another element is open data. So many of the world's organizations, they're gathering data every day, and technology makes it scarily easy, even so. It's useful to actually gather this data often, and it can be applied often in other settings than it was necessarily intended for. Now, this can be done in the evil way of selling information, but it can also be to actually open up data and allow others to work on it. I'll give you a very simple example. So just recently, I relocated to the Netherlands. And we decided to move to just outside of Amsterdam, and it's quite close to Schiphol Airport, which is the second or third largest or busiest airport in Europe. And so I found this website which maps flight data with sort of flight paths and measures sound pollution. And then I plotted that into the location that we want to live, and I could sort of see where it would be acceptable for us to live. very simple example, but it allowed us to find a place where we now have planes flying over the building all the time, and also live in a non-polluted environment, but still live close to the city and close to the airport. So that kind of data is exciting because you can do so much with it. And there's tons of examples of that, and people are using it all over the world for disaster relief, to monitor environmental sort of like catastrophes, etc. Because this data is often just there. Anyway, it's a key component. Another key component is accessibility, so really lowering barriers of entry into any system. And I think that one of the key things that we'll see in the future is this component. Just a few years back, you'll know that the open source movement was very strong and powerful, and it resulted in a lot of great platforms like the Android operating system. The trend is shifting a bit, though, not in the sense that open source is becoming less significant, it still is, but the focus is not so much on the open source part, but in the open access part. And so people are more trying to build technology which is application based, has APIs, so it can interface with each other, so you can seamlessly send information from one program or platform to another without necessarily having for it to be open source, but the information is open. And that's a really interesting trend. So how about this in the future? If you see applying a similar architecture that we have seen online and evolve in online platforms with this sort of open data, a low barrier of entry, and is essentially integration of a seamless experience. If you apply that to more of an offline setting, if you apply that to how we work collaboratively, or how we build a network like the Hub or other spaces around the world, what do you get? Well, you get these communities of inspired and enabled collaborators who really can access information and each other as a resource at any point in time that they need it. This really allows a very potent workforce and market economy to be created that is much more just in time, often dependent. There's less waiting, there's less, you have to educate yourself and learn everything by yourself because you can just pull in the necessary resources. And that's exciting. The wealth of knowledge and the flexibility in that kind of model is frankly just mind-blowing. So this ultimately lowers production times. It shortens the wait that often is there in an entrepreneurial or creative process. They're looking for the right partner, the painful process of recruitment of talent to make your project or business a success. And then what we're working on right now, in which where we see the future is really headed, is sort of like integrating all of this into one. And you really see this, the online and the physical world basically coming together. And I think that's the greatest potential, but it's also the scariest part of it. And in a sense, we're looking now technically how we can augment our members' experience so that they really can access the Hub from different spaces. And we're not just talking about the Hub here, but about the sector as a whole, how we can really augment that experience in a way that people feel that they can, through technology or through the physical space, constantly be connected to whatever drives their impact. Now, that's also scary, because what does that mean? Because as individuals, our biology hasn't necessarily evolved as much as our technology has, and there's this huge sense of urgency, and in the sense that we have our smartphones, we have their notifications. The first internet addiction clinics have already opened up around the world because we're constantly online, we're constantly available for work, for personal stuff, and the lines between those are increasingly blurring. And that's the scary part maybe of the future, and that's where we have to also I think try and design designed for different spaces, for different ways of making things work. I was sitting at a restaurant the other day, and there was a family next to me, and there were 2 parents, 3 kids between the ages of 5 and 50, and each of them had a smartphone, right? They were sitting, chatting. I don't know if they were talking to each other or who they were talking to, but they're definitely not talking with each other directly. And that was, for me, a very, very strong mental image. And again, in a physical space like the Hub, in a collaborative space like the Hub, where we really see this sort of new micro-multinational and entrepreneurial workforce of the future anchored in, what does that mean for how do we design it? So right now, we're seeing hubs tend to design for relaxed spaces where you can power nap, or there's a sofa you can lounge on when you're having a call. In the programming, there's often a bit of the sort of holistic mindfulness sort of like attitude built in. And we try and sort of, you have to take care of both yourself as well as your professional intention. But funnily enough, I've just in the last week, I've talked with 3 people from 3 different continents who are working on very similar projects. They're working on spaces for offline immersion, offline decoupling, and reflection. And we're not talking about people going on holiday here, but it's a kind of space where you would leave your phone far away, or you have to leave it at home when you go there, or there's no signal because you're at such a remote location. And it's about really trying to be able to counterbalance this intensive experience of working that we're growing into, where the technology suddenly makes us being at work 24/7. And in that space, I think there was one is targeted at executives, the other one is an Indian retreat for creatives, and the third one is going to happen in Bali the first time. And it's like people who are just attracted to detoxing from the work environment. And it's not holidays, really, they're going there so that they can be energized to work and work in a different way. What I see is definitely that this integration is the biggest opportunity, because it allows us to collaborate with people around the world to solve our issues, to solve our problems in ways that we would never have imagined before. We can solve problems much faster, much quicker than we ever could have before. At the same time, how do we stay human in that? How do we stay anchored in that? How do we stay connected to ourselves? And not kill ourselves in the process. And I think that that's going to be the challenge of the future of how we work and how we work in spaces like the Hub. And maybe finally, I just wanted to mention within the Hub, I was mentioning all these requests that we had around the world. We've grown from one space in 2005 to 40 spaces that are open on 5 continents now. We'll be 50 at the end of the year. We're going to be 100 probably in 2015, and it's growing so rapidly, and we're trying to sort of like understand what does that mean. And one realization we came to was we're not a network anymore. We're part of an ecosystem. And what's interesting about is that ecosystems are platforms. They're basically they're places where there are no barriers. Because barriers are there to shut things out. Ecosystems have membranes. Membranes, they're permeable and allow relevant information to sort of like enter the system where it needs to. And what I see for the future is that it's not going to be the big players. There's this organization doing that, there's this organization doing that, and they're competing head on and fighting each other. But it's like, what is organization A and organization B collaborating on? What are they creating together? What are they building? And it's just going to be, I think that's going to hugely affect the way that we work together and the way that spaces like ours collaborate. So the way I see the Hub and many of the other spaces that are similar to us is that will become basically an infrastructure for collaboration for the future, where the European Commission, some entrepreneurs, a non-profit sector, and a corporate entity can actually come together and collaborate and solve an issue that everybody kind of can appreciate the outcome of. Anyway, those were my thoughts that I wanted to share with you today, and then look forward to hearing your thoughts and engaging into conversation, and yeah, just hearing what you guys have got to say.
Thanks a lot, Simon. I think all of us share this feeling, this surprise feeling. You put together very different things that we didn't expect, and I think all of us are a bit making sense of so many interesting ideas, and especially of associations of ideas that we previously didn't have. So the chat was a bit slow in the beginning, and then it suddenly exploded, so it will be a hard task to summarize. But I think there are several points coming out, and several different questions. I would like to start with one which doesn't come from me, because I also added many. So we are talking about mixed realities sometimes, and you talk about augmenting spaces. Can you tell us some of the concepts and what is missing to make, also from a technological point of view, to make these immersive workspaces a reality? What are the challenges that you are encountering? What are the best ideas that you found?
Well, I've got a couple of really interesting examples there, and Gael, who's I think on here as well, is a person that we've actually been trying to evolve this particular space with. So what we were trying to say is we've got all this wealth of data that's there in our system. The hub has 6,000 members globally, just to put that figure out there. So our interest is trying to understand how do we enable them the best way possible to achieve the impact they want to have. That's kind of our mission in life, so to speak. And we believe that a technological platform is part of that answer, and we're looking into how do we create a sort of like a trust currency type of system that could allow us to visualize the trusted connections in a network, and the skills and the talent and the knowledge in a way that people are kind of not confronted but presented with opportunity down the line when they're moving into their creative entrepreneurial process. That is one of the projects that excites me the most, and Gael has done a fantastic job working on that. So if you want to talk to somebody who's an expert, then he's the guy to talk to. I think that's one part of the story with this online, but then the offline is just as important and just as key, because what we often forget is we get sort of like, whenever people are presenting technology platforms, it's always, oh, this can just solve everything for you. But it usually can't, because what it means is it can solve some issues, but what you need to do is you need to work on the physical implementation, the actual practice of doing it, and that's something you do right here, right now, in the space that you work in. So we work with hosts, we work with people who are operate in our spaces, both the virtual and the offline, but primarily the offline, to augment the experience. They know pretty much all of the members in one way or another, and they're there to actually just sort of like be the bridges and the makers of connections, and they listen a lot. That's what, like, half their job is just listening and understanding how can I increase this member's impact potential by connecting him, her to other people in this community. Engage into that.
There is Irina is very active, posing many questions regarding is the commercial versus non-commercial issue. So the future you're talking to us, is it only relevant for non-commercial ventures? Are there reasons behind different ecosystems, and does it mean that there is a shift, for example, between the importance in commercial and non-commercial ventures? Or is this a paradigm which is cross-cutting, and how do you deal then with the IPR issues and appropriation issues, which are so important for a commercial purpose?
Yeah, I think it's moving closer to an integration, and I think a corporate example is this whole sort of Samsung Nokia case, sort of Samsung Apple case, sorry, where they keep suing each other over the different patents and whatnot. And there's also this sort of like acquisitioning of patents in order to sort of like down the line, you can sue somebody or get royalties. And even the legislative environment around that is actually to loosen up the patent legislation and actually or pull back the opportunity for people to patent stuff which is blatantly obvious, just a general industry trend, and is a broadly applicable technology which everybody should have access to, and also decrease the sort of the patent periods. There's a lot of work being done around that, because the innovation is moving so fast that a 25-year patent just doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe a 3-year one does. So that's interesting. Another perspective, I think, is if you look at the way we've done it in the hub. So we're all like 90% for-profit, locally owned hubs around the world, right? Who together have signed an agreement that we pool our assets collectively, which means that instead of each hub developing its own IP and putting all the R&D cost into that, and then also trying to sort of resell that royalty-wise or in some other fashion or form, what we do is we say, well, any IP created in a hub, this is not by members, but by hubs themselves, any IP created in a hub by the hub staff or owners is automatically shared with everybody. This way, we create a wealth of assets which you can easily access, and then it's an interesting negotiation, right? Because any new hub that opens now, where we, for example, have a hub in Tokyo that just opened a couple of months ago, right? They are basically suddenly having access to an IP assets group which has been built over 7 or 8 years, right? And they can sort of access that and they can use it, but they also contribute in. And I think the whole sort of like conversation about whether the combined assets obviously have a lot more value than if we all sit and harbor them ourselves is really interesting, particularly in our industry and where we're going from. We're not non-profit as such, we're in it for sustainable enterprise generally. But yeah, it's an interesting question, particularly in open working spaces otherwise, because often members will be some members will be the first to ask, so if I'm sitting here having a confidential conversation, will somebody else steal my idea and whatnot? I guess if you're in defense or in pharmaceuticals, then maybe that's an appropriate approach that sort of stems from that type of environment. However, in the hub, what we usually say is that if you're an entrepreneur, nobody else can really do your idea as good as you can because it's your idea, right? So if your idea doesn't result in something and somebody else ends up doing it, then it's probably either because you shouldn't be doing it in the first place because you're not qualified, or they'll do a better job. So there's also a sort of a tendency to let go of ideas. We have tons of them. I have 20 of them a week. Which ones do I say here on a call and share with you, and which ones do I work on for myself for now and then take to the world later? There's a certain balance to be struck there.
Great. I also want to add, you didn't mention, but the hub has also experimented with alternative currencies, which are something which to me always looked so, new age and crazy until I realized that Bitcoin was becoming an explosive phenomenon. So you really can see unexpected business model and unexpected revenue sources and way to manage this. Now, We are approaching the close of the discussion. I'm glad that we are short of time, because this is always a good indication of level of interest of a discussion. So I would like to ask to all participants if they want to make a self-standing statement rather than a simple question, in particular with regard to the policy perspective of this. So the floor is open. What you have to do is to signal with the hands up. There is a very nice man on top of the screen with the hands up, and you will see it's a symbol for wanting to talk. So if any of you would like to start making one reflection about the policy implication, I would very much welcome you. Someone, Gary, is typing. Ah. So let's before while people think, Simon, one straight question: if you were Nelly Cruz, or if you were the next Nelly Cruz, or if you were the next Barroso, what would be the single thing needed to get the opportunities that are there and avoid the risks? And I mean, it doesn't have to be the most important thing, but it has to be an interesting idea.
Okay. The single thing I would do with our government system and governance system is create ownership. I think that's the best thing we can do. And I think we need to look at changing our democracy so it's an engaging system. So it's no small thing that I'm requesting. But to find a way for people to be involved in decisions, to engage and take ownership, and potentially even implement and really take part in that's what makes stuff work. It's hard to engage people when they're in a service delivery kind of relationship to the government. When you tax them and say, this is tax, then that's a pain to pay. But if you say, hey, this is an investment in what we decide to do together, that's a completely different conversation. And that's exciting.